questions without notice. Are there any questions? I give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to Labor's economic plan and budget strategy available on the Labor Party's website. Page 7 of that document outlined a 5-point economic plan. The first point is, and I quote, to cut power bills by $275 a year by 2025. With the budget confirming this promise has been broken, will the Prime Minister admit that his economic plan is in ruins?
Members on my right, the Prime Minister will be heard in silence. And I give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question, which goes to energy prices and goes to what was said before the election.
The Leader of the Opposition has asked his question, and I just said that the Prime Minister will be heard in silence. I want to be clear today. Questions will be heard in silence out of respect for the office of the person asking them, but also answers will be heard in silence. And I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. And indeed, before the election, there were a range of things said. And indeed, when confronted with the fact that when in government there was a warning of a pending spike in energy prices and that the announcement was delayed until after the election, this is what the former Minister for Energy and now Shadow Treasurer said just, I think, yesterday, the 26th of October. He said this: that was a report from the Australian Energy Regulator. It puts it out, not me, and I didn't say it. That's what he said yesterday. Well, that's interesting, Mr Speaker, because this is the very document that goes to the increase that has occurred in the default retail price, which has fed into energy prices increasing by figures around about 20%. 20%. But he said he didn't see it and didn't know about it. An interesting statement. Here, of course, is the document, Default Market Offer Prices 22-23, the final determination of May 2022, and I tabled the document. I tabled the document from the Australian Energy Regulator. But at the same time, here is the change in the law dated the 31st of March 2022, and the bloke who said he didn't see it, he didn't know about it, it puts it out, not me, and I didn't say it yesterday said this.
The Prime Minister will pause. The order. Members on my left and my right, I wish to hear the Manager of Opposition Business in silence. I give the call to the Manager.
It's on relevance. He's had a 2-minute preamble. You should bring him back to the topic of the question, the $275 reduction that was promised.
You may resume your seat. Thank you for your constructive feedback. On the point of order, the Prime Minister.
Point of order, Mr Speaker. The question went to what was said about energy prices before the election in May 2022. My answer has gone to what was happening to energy prices in May 2022 and can't be more relevant to the question that was asked by the Leader of the Opposition. So I'd ask you to rule against the point of order.
The Prime Minister is correct when he says that the question was about 5 points announced before the election. The Prime Minister is referring to the policy announcement and what was announced. So the Prime Minister is being directly relevant, and I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. And here's the regulation, the change in the law, 31st of March 2022, from Angus Taylor, who said he didn't see it or know anything about it. There's 2 simple changes. Item 1, paragraph 17, omit 1st of May, substitute the first business day after 25th of May. How subtle is that? How subtle is that? They changed the law in March with a regulation Parliament couldn't disallow the change in regulation because we were going into caretaker mode and changed it till after the election.
Order.
What a farce. You have
Prime
no
Minister's
credibility.
time has expired. Order. The member for Petrie, when the House comes to order, the Leader of the Opposition is seeking the call.
I am, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister's used unparliamentary language toward the Shadow Treasurer and he should be asked to withdraw it.
That's not possible.
Well, I didn't hear. If the Prime Minister has said something, I didn't hear what he said. I heard someone say an unparliamentary remark on my left just minutes ago. Does the Prime Minister wish to withdraw?
Mr Speaker, that's one of the nicest things I've said about the Shadow Treasurer.
If I can just remind all— Order. The member for Barker, it's been a long week. The member for Barker can cease interjecting. When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Minister for Health. How does the budget deliver on the government's commitment to improve healthcare after nearly a decade of cuts and neglect, and how does it compare to previous budgets?
Give the call to the Minister for Health and Ageing.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Robertson for his question and for the contribution he's already making to this area as a qualified emergency physician. And he knows that at the May election, Labor promised to strengthen Medicare and cut the price of medicines. And, Mr Speaker, this week's budget delivers on that promise. Today, legislation passed the parliament to deliver the biggest cut to the price of medicines in the 75-year history of the PBS. Because, Mr Speaker, it's really not that hard to deliver to the Australian people what you said at the election you would deliver. But it could not be more different. This budget could not be more different. More different than—
The Minister will resume the seat. Members on my left, when the House comes to order, when there is silence in the House, question time will continue. There is obviously far too much noise in the chamber. I'm issuing a general warning to all members, and I'll say it again, I wish to hear the questions in silence and the answers. So I call the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, because this budget could not possibly be more different than the first budget that the Leader of the Opposition delivered as a Health Minister back in 2014. His first budget, after famously promising there'd be no cuts to health, was the most spectacular betrayal of Australian voters on health policy in Australian history. The most savage, heartless cuts to health care anyone can remember in this country, all cooked up by the Leader of the Opposition. Mr Speaker, our first budget delivers the biggest cut to the price— he walks away. Our first budget delivers the biggest cut to the price of medicines in the history of the PBS. His first budget tried to raise the price of every script for every patient by as much as $5 for general patients. He tried to cut Commonwealth funding to public hospitals by $50 billion. Just jaw-dropping, $50 billion. He was so proud of it, he arranged for a special glossy brochure to be printed to boast about it to the Australian people. And famously, or infamously, he tried to slug every single Australian patient $7 for every single visit to a GP. Pensioners, concession card holders. And when we blocked that vandalism in the Senate, Mr Speaker, he froze the Medicare rebate for 6 long years instead, a policy doubled down on by the Deputy Leader of the Opposition when she was the Health Minister. He cut funding to states for elective surgery. He abolished Health Workforce Australia, seeding the workforce crisis we have in the sector today. He abolished the Preventative Health Agency, perhaps no surprise given the attitude he brought to our world-leading reforms in plain packaging for tobacco. And, Mr Speaker, he has never admitted he was wrong. He has never once admitted he was wrong. No wonder even Tony Abbott thought he was too radical to be Health Minister and sacked him after 15 months, just 15 months in the job. And no wonder, Mr Speaker, Australia's doctors famously voted him as the worst Health Minister in Australian political history.
But Malcolm likes him.
The Minister for Climate Change and Energy will cease interjecting. I'd like to hear order. I'd like to hear the Deputy Leader of the Opposition in silence, and I give her the call.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Yesterday, the Treasurer finally confirmed that the Labor Party misled the Australian people 97 times before the last election on their promise to reduce power bills by $275 when he admitted it wasn't in the budget after saying it was.
Member for Moreton.
Given the Treasurer has now apologised to one Australian over this, Charles Croucher from 9 News, when will the other 26 million Australians get their apology?
Order. And I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I thank the Deputy Leader for her question. I reject the premise of the question because it goes to a failure still for those opposite to actually recognise that renewable energy is the cheapest form of new energy. It goes to that.
Order. Members on my left.
Yesterday I spoke about the deal that was done with the Tasmanian government and what they have to say, what the Victorian government have to say as well, and I spoke about what the New South Wales Premier had to say. But I agree with the statement that the cheapest, most reliable and cleanest energy on the planet are renewables. I agree with the statement. The cheapest way to deliver electricity today is not coal, it's not gas, it's certainly not nuclear, it's wind, solar backed up by pumped hydro and batteries. So if you care about cheap energy and reliable energy, then you're looking at wind, solar and pumped hydro. Now, they're not my statements, Mr Speaker. They're the statements of Matt Keane, the New South Wales Treasurer, the Deputy Leader of this Deputy Leader's party in New South Wales.
The Prime Minister will take a break. Order. Members on my right, close to me, can cease interjecting, and I call the Deputy Leader on a point of order.
A point of order on relevance, Mr Speaker. Why can't the Prime Minister say
resume your seat.
207?
Resume your seat. I was pretty clear yesterday about that abuse of standing order. The Deputy Leader has special privileges which he's taken advantage of. I just remind all members to state the point of order of relevance. I will take the point, but if it continues, I will not take them anymore. I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. But it's not just more enlightened members of the Liberal Party who recognise that the earth is round and renewables are the newest form, cheapest form of new energy. It's also the business community. This is what Jennifer Westacott said when they're not busy trying to expel Liberal business people like Nigel Satley. They could at least listen to them. Jennifer Westacott said this: "You'll also be paying less for your power because at the moment building new renewables is cheaper than building new coal, and cleaner electricity will continue to drive down energy prices."
Member for Hume.
That is what the business community says. That is what state and territory governments say. But what do those opposite do? You know, they pretend that they didn't know. They pretend the former Energy Minister didn't know about regulations that he was delivering to hide a determination by the Australian Energy Regulator until it just happened to be to replace the 1st of May with the 25th of May. Because what happened in between the 1st of May and 25th of May? What happened? What was it? What was it? What was it that happened on the 21st of May? They wanted to avoid the Australian people before they voted knowing about the hike in energy prices that was occurring on their watch because of their failure to invest in energy.
The Prime Minister's time has expired. Order. The House will come to order. The member for Hume will cease interjecting. Give the call to the member for Werriwa.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Why is responsible budget management important in uncertain times? How is this relevant to consideration of government appropriations which are pending in the House?
I give the call to the Treasurer.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the member for Werriwa for her question. Inflation is the defining challenge in our economy, and it was the defining influence on the budget that we handed down this week. And the backdrop for that budget was obviously the slowing global economy, a war in Europe, and structural spending pressures on the budget as well. And that's why the three parts of our budget strategy were so important and so right for the times that we confront together. First of all, cost of living relief that was provided in a way that was responsible, not reckless, because it didn't add extra pressure on inflation. Secondly, investing in the drivers of growth and resilience in our economy and beginning to repair some of our broken supply chains. And then thirdly, starting the hard work of repairing the budget so that we can rebuild our buffers against some of the global uncertainty that we confront. Now, the spending restraint and budget responsibility that we saw in Tuesday night's budget would have been absolutely unrecognisable to those opposite. And let me give you two examples of that, Mr Speaker. In our budget on Tuesday night, we had $22 billion worth of savings. $22 billion worth of savings. Not a bad start. The budget in March, delivered from this dispatch box by my predecessor, had precisely $0 in savings on the spending side of the budget. $22 billion on Tuesday, $0 in March. And then on Tuesday night, we banked 99% of the temporary revenue surge that we got from higher commodity prices. In the budget in March, they banked 40%, so 99% versus 40%. Now, no wonder, Mr Speaker, they don't have enough to show for their $1 trillion in debt. And we're told today that the Leader of the Opposition, in his speech tonight about the appropriations, wants to talk about the government's economic record. And this is his opportunity. He takes very seriously his responsibility as the Leader of the Leftovers, Mr Speaker. And in doing so, he has a rolled gold opportunity tonight to fess up for the coalition record on the economy. And let's consider it for a moment. Their record on the economy is skill shortages holding the economy back. It's stagnant wages for a decade. It's weak productivity and business investment. It's an aged care crisis. It's $1 trillion in debt with nowhere near enough to show for it. And it's this energy policy chaos which is making us more vulnerable to global energy shocks. Mr Speaker, what we're seeing in our energy markets right now, the blame for that rests squarely with Vladimir Putin.
Order.
But the blame for making us more vulnerable to it rests with the member for Hume.
Order. When the House comes to order, members for Barker and O'Connor are on a warning. And I give the call to the member for Brisbane.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry, Science and Resources. Why does the budget contain more than $40 billion in fossil fuel subsidies, including $30 million to frack for gas in the Beetaloo Basin and almost $2 billion to fund a gas export terminal in Darwin Harbour when we are in the middle of a climate emergency?
I give the call to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. A lot of that is not directed necessarily in my own portfolio and relates to other areas, but we're happy to take it on notice and we'll get back to you with some response.
Give the call to order. Give the call to the member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the government's budget delivering for women?
I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Boothby for her question and for her advocacy. The member for Boothby, of course, stood up for the rights of women, particularly in the roles that she played at St Vincent de Paul and other areas as well, looking after disadvantaged people in her electorate. And this is a budget that puts equality for women at its centre. Cheaper childcare and early childhood education. $4.6 billion over 4 years. Good for families, good for children, but importantly, economic reform that's good for the economy. Reform that will boost productivity, boost women's workforce participation, boost their retirement incomes, and, of course, act as an incentive to boost population as well. We have the biggest expansion to paid parental leave since it was introduced back in 2011, of course, by a Labor government, designed to encourage parents to share caring responsibilities more equally. Record funding for women's safety, $1.7 billion over 6 years. This includes investing in an additional 500 frontline community workers, ensuring that the returns of the $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund can help deliver 4,000 new homes to put a roof over the heads of women and children fleeing violence and older women who are at risk of homelessness. $100 million for crisis and transitional housing options for women and children fleeing violence. Fully implementing the Respect at Work report, including implementing working women's centres in every single state and territory. And today, I note that today we have finally carried through both houses of parliament 10 days family domestic violence leave, an important thing so that women won't be faced with a choice of putting food on the table or staying in a violent situation. Very important, and I thank the parliament for adopting this important measure. Importantly as well, of the 2.7 million workers who the just over $1 an hour pay increase flowed through to, an overwhelming majority of those were women. Just as those women who work in the aged care sector will benefit from our advocacy of an increase in pay. We're leading the national push to expose and close the gender pay gap. We have introduced the Respect at Work report legislation, as we have the other legislation around this. All of this has been missing from the national stage for nearly a decade. In their first budget, of course, Tony Abbott was remarkably the Minister for the Status of Women. There was only one woman in their first cabinet. We have a majority of women in the Labor caucus, 54 out of 103, a fact that we are proud of.
To the member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The budget confirms that a typical family will be $2,000 worse off by Christmas, with inflation, interest rates and unemployment all forecast to go up. Given this increasing pressure on the cost of living, what specific action is the government taking to fast-track new natural gas projects, and when can Australians expect to see relief?
I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker. I thank the Shadow Treasurer for his question. Of course, they had a Shadow Treasurer even when they had a Treasurer over here. But we have one Treasurer, and he's done a fantastic job. He's done a fantastic job. And the budget has been well received by people who are economically literate. This is what Jennifer Westacott of the Business Council had to say. Amid global economic turmoil, this budget steadies the ship and sets the groundwork for reform to drive economic growth in the May budget. This is a cautious and careful budget that avoids making our inflation problem worse. This is a crucial first step to restoring our budget position and building our national resilience. We welcome investments to boost productivity and participation through skills, education, childcare and expanding paid parental leave. We strongly support the government's comprehensive skills package and migration announcement. It went on and on. But the ACCI said this, Andrew McKellar said this, Tonight's budget is a responsible one. This budget covers the essential elements of economic management and tackling growing cost pressures. As the budget warns, we cannot afford to be complacent against the global headwinds of severe inflationary pressures, climbing interest rates and soaring energy prices. Through the Powering Australia plan and funding for new energy infrastructure, the budget provides significant investment to underpin the transition to a net zero future that supports new opportunity for industry. So we have big business supporting the budget. We have medium-sized business supporting the budget. But what did Cosboa have to say? This is what Cosboa had to say. Small business. Small business. Those apparently the affiliates of the Australian Labor Party in small business had this to say. This budget delivers benefits for small business owners and sole traders in 4 key areas, namely improved internet connectivity, small business mental health support, cost of living improvements to childcare support, and vet and skills planning.
Cease interjecting.
This is what the master builders had to say. Again, apparently an affiliate of the Labor Party. The 2022 Housing Accord is a welcome signal to the building and construction industry who have been crying out for action to address housing affordability barriers and supply constraints. I've got more, Mr Speaker, but I'll wait for the next question for the further endorsements done by people who used to be their allies, who they now ridicule.
Time has expired. Give the call to the member for Pearce.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to clean up the defence procurement mess left by the previous government? Thank you.
We give the call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Pearce for her very important question. In coming to office, the Albanese Labor government has inherited a defence procurement mess. When those opposite were in power, there were 28 different programs that were running a total of 97 years over time. Hunter-class frigates, 4 years late, $15 billion over budget. The Spartan battlefield aircraft, 4.5 years late, unable to fly into a battlefield. Offshore patrol vessels, a year late. Evolved Cape-class patrol vessels, another year late. And that's before we even start talking about submarines. When it came to defence announcements, those opposite were best in class. Vaudeville, hoopla, we saw Top Gun music. It was always showtime. It was as if they were trying to tap dance our adversaries into submission. Those opposite, their strategy was to have Australia walk onto the battlefield. Their strategy was to have Australia walk onto the battlefield armed with press releases. But when it comes to actually delivering capability, getting the hard power equation right, those opposite were the single worst defence procurement government in our nation's history, and not least because they themselves were a picture of chaos. In 9 years, we had 7 different defence ministers, the last of whom is sitting right there as the leader of the opposition. And all of this at a time when we are facing the most precarious strategic circumstances since the Second World War. Under those opposite, Australia's lost decade could not have come at a more damaging historic moment. Now, under Labor, it's going to be different. We are getting back to the basics, establishing an independent project management office within defence. I mean, we understand defence projects are large, they are complex, they don't always go right, which is why it's so important that you have objective criteria and metrics before projects are put on the project of interest, project of concern list. And when they are, we're going to make sure that there are monthly reports to ministers so that we can get those projects back on track. In other words, we are going to actively manage defence procurement because we get that the defence budget is going to increase, which is why it's so important that the quality of defence expenditure is excellent, so that we can deliver value for money for taxpayers and much better capabilities which keep Australians safe.
I give the call to the Leader of the Nationals.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How many private properties will be impacted from the construction of the 28,000 kilometres in new poles and wires under government's energy policy?
The member for Hume will cease interjecting. The member for Hume is warned. And I give the call when the House comes to order. The Leader of the Nationals was heard in silence. Members on my right, I will hear the Minister in silence. I give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the National Party refers to the ISP, the Integrated Systems Plan. The 28,000-kilometre figure refers to the green energy superpower scenario under the Integrated Systems Plan. 10,000 kilometres is a step change. The government is getting on with implementing the ISP through the Rewiring the Nation policy. Just tomorrow, the nation's energy ministers will meet and review progress in reforming the regulatory process of transmission to improve community consultation and compensation, a process started by this government.
Members
a process started by this government, not started by the previous government, because we want to ensure communities are consulted properly.
The Minister for Infrastructure. The Minister for Infrastructure will cease interjecting. I give the call to the Leader of the Nationals on a point of order.
Relevance, Mr Speaker. The question was very tight. It asked for a specific number of properties that will be impacted by the 28,000 kilometres of poles and wires.
You may resume your seat. Thank you for that. The Minister is in order. He's been going for 40... If you let me finish, the Leader of the Nationals, he's been going for 40 seconds. There was a specific question in there regarding a number, and I will ask the Minister to return when he's ready to that part of the question, and I give him the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And the Leader of the National Party asked me about the 28,000 kilometres, which is the green hydrogen superpower scenario. And there's 28,000 kilometres under that scenario, a scenario that was prepared under the previous government. Now, Mr Speaker, as I said, energy ministers tomorrow are reviewing the progress in reforming the RIT-T. We're also hearing from the Renewable Energy Commissioner, a federal government appointee, who has been working with the New South Wales state government and doing excellent work, Mr Speaker. Just this week, they announced a new compensation regime for people impacted. Now, the Leader of the National Party is very concerned about social licence. I welcome his interest. I welcome his interest in the social licence of nuclear...
You may resume your seat. Order. When the House comes to order, I'll ask the Minister to address that part of the question. He's still got 1.5 minutes to go. I'm listening carefully to his answer. He has 3 minutes to answer the question. There is no time constraint about when he has to answer. I'm listening carefully. The Leader of the House.
Just to raise a point of order, there's the normal rule about a point of order on direct relevance only being able to be taken once. The opposition, having already raised that, have now decided from the interjections to not be shouting at the government, but in fact to be shouting at you and about your ruling. And I just want to draw your attention to it, and in my role as Leader of the House, just urge that...
Order. Members on my left will cease interjecting.
No, interject as hard as you want to me, but you don't do it to the Speaker. You don't.
Order. Members on my left. Members on my left will cease interjecting. I've asked the Minister to return to that part of the question, and I told the House I'm listening carefully to the answer. The Minister may continue.
We'll continue to work with the Renewable Energy Commissioner and with my state and territory colleagues, and will continue to oppose your plans to put nuclear reactors right across Australia, which doesn't have much community support or licence either.
I give the call to the member for Gilmore.
My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to support workers who need flexible work arrangements, particularly those in low feminised sectors?
Give the call to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. The Secure Jobs Better Pay Bill will bring our workplace laws up to date with the modern expectations of flexible work. At the moment, under current law, workers have a right to request. And many members, including the member for Gilmore, many members on this side, some on the crossbench as well, have had arguments in favour of trying to find better pathways for flexible work for a long time. The way it works at the moment is you have a right to request flexible work. But if you make that request of your employer and the employer just says, no, I've got business grounds to say no, that's the end of it. There's no right of appeal. It goes no further. The sorts of issues where flexible work hits is when someone's given a roster change and the impact of that roster change means they will now have a 3-year-old who they cannot pick up from childcare. Massive changes in people's lives if all they do is ask, that's the only right they've got, they're told no, and at that moment the only choice that faces Australians in that position is to give up the job. And that's what happens. And inevitably people then move to more insecure work and lower paid work. Something which has been supported by the recent Senate inquiries that was chaired by Senator Barbara Pocock, something that there's a report that members on both sides of the crossbench have been briefed on, that was an extraordinary amount of work done in the retail and fast food sector by the SDA, and the member for Goldstein, prior to coming here, was very much involved in a lot of that research, went through the impact that the absence of rights on flexible work was having, in particular disproportionately, on women workers in Australia. By introducing a right to arbitration, what it means isn't that every one of these cases will go to arbitration. It means that where these decisions are being made, often in good companies but by a low level of management, not respecting people's family responsibilities, we will end up with sensible outcomes. It should not be the case that particularly people with less secure work, very often part-time workers, are in a situation where the only choice in front of them is to give up the job if they want to keep their caring and family responsibilities. Now, this is within the Secure Jobs Better Pay Bill. This is within the bill that those opposite committed to vote against before it had been introduced to the parliament. This is the bill designed to get wages moving. If you support flexible workplaces, we need to change these laws so that people faced with these situations don't have to choose between those they love and keeping their job.
Give the call to the Leader of the Nationals.
My question is again to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How many private properties will be impacted from the construction of the 28,000 kilometres in new poles and wires under the government's energy policy?
Order. I give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Again, Mr. This is the new culture war from the Leader of the National Party, and I wish him well on it. If this is the hill he chooses to die on, Mr. Speaker, that's the matter for him.
The member for Hume
because
will cease interjecting.
He's referring to the green hydrogen superpower option under the ISP, which was released while they were in office, which was released while they were the government, Mr. Speaker. It's actually a document which had bipartisan support, Mr. Speaker. But what he refers to the government's 28,000 kilometres of transmission lines. In fact, we are seeking to implement the ISP step change model. So he's talking about something completely fraudulent, Mr. Speaker. And also, we are getting on with the job of better consultation, because what really matters is route selection. Route selection, there are options for where the routes go. They can go on public land. They can, after appropriate community consultation and appropriate compensation, go with private land. So, I guess, could a nuclear power plant, Mr. Speaker, which the Leader of the National Party seems so addicted to?
Has the Minister concluded his answer? Yes. No. The Minister's concluded his answer. Order. Members on my left and my right, when the House comes to order, I will hear from the member for Moreton.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. Minister, what has been the response to the Albanese Labor government's National Housing Accord and its reforms to address housing affordability in Australia?
Give the call to the Minister for Small Business, the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Moreton for this very important question. And I know the member for Moreton has previously been on the board of the Kyabra Community Organisation that supports people into housing. So I know that he, like many people on this side of the House and others in the chamber, is deeply committed to making housing more affordable in Australia. And indeed, that's why in the budget on Tuesday night we committed to addressing the cost of living pressures by making housing more affordable. After nearly a decade of more inaction and neglect from those opposite, we are implementing a suite of reforms to ensure that more Australians have a safe and affordable place to call home. Indeed, as Kate Colvin, who's spokesperson for Everybody's Home, said, and I quote, "After almost a decade of the coalition shirking federal responsibility on desperately needed investment in affordable rentals, the new federal government is showing national leadership." Mr Speaker, our reforms will help address the cost of living pressures people are experiencing and are both responsible and right for the times. Indeed, the National Housing Accord has been agreed by each tier of government, by the sector, by investors and by industry, as well as community housing providers. It is a national commitment, Mr Speaker, to work together to address the systematic problems in the housing market, and it will be guided by the National Supply and Affordability Council. Of course, it is an aspiration for 1 million homes from 2024 across the country.
Order.
And we will deliver in the budget $350 million to deliver 10,000 new affordable homes, Mr Speaker, and this will be matched by the states to deliver a further 10,000 affordable homes. It commits
Members
each
on my
tier
left
of
will
government
cease
to
interjecting.
boost the supply of new affordable housing by streamlining land use and planning controls and other barriers to building new affordable homes. It will also help deliver private investment, including from superannuation funds, to boost new and affordable housing. As the New South Wales Minister Roberts said, and I quote, "The Accord will help address Australia's housing supply challenges and enable the delivery of more social and affordable housing." Indeed, he went on and he said it recognises the importance of states and territories to expedite zoning, planning and land releases for social and affordable housing. Or as the head of ACOS said about the Accord,
Members
it's
on my
a serious
left,
start
there's
to
far too
tackling
much
the
noise.
housing crisis. And then, of course, we had Graham Wolfe from the Housing HIA. He said, and I quote, "Australia's first budget shows leadership to tackle Australia's housing supply and affordability challenges for all Australia. Our housing policy and our investments are right for the times and they're right for the future, and we're going to get on with delivering more affordable homes for more Australians."
I give the call to the honourable member for Kooyong.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Minister for Infrastructure and Regional Development. In this week's budget, your government allocated $1.5 billion for the Middle Arm Industrial Zone in Darwin Harbour. Middle Arm proposes petrochemical manufacturing using gas from the Beetaloo Basin. Unless that changes, this is a subsidy for the fossil fuel industries. Will you guarantee the Middle Arm precinct will not produce petrochemicals or gas-based manufacturing?
I give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thanks very much to the member for Kooyong for your question. Well, the Australian government invests in projects such as the Middle Arm Precinct in an important way of setting up our economy for a sustainable future. Instead of funding any particular companies or particular industries, we're actually investing in common use enabling infrastructure. We do that across industrial precincts across the country to give all potential users in the market the opportunity to grow and thrive. This includes those able to process and export green hydrogen and energy transition components made locally. The government is providing in the budget $1.9 billion in planned equity to support the development of Middle Arm, together with regional logistic hubs in the Northern Territory across those key transport links. That's what we're doing. This investment will enable the precinct to be globally competitive, to be sustainable, with a focus. And I recognise that I can hear some interjections from the member for New England about that. He likes this. I know that he likes this particular project, which I'm very happy about. this year. No, I was actually acknowledging that that's what he was doing. This investment will enable the precinct to be globally competitive and sustainable, but it will focus on low-emission hydrocarbons, green hydrogen and critical minerals processing. Demand, we know.
Point of order. I'll hear from the member for Kooyong and ask the minister to take a pause.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I was hoping for an answer to my question.
That is not order. That is not order. To remind all members, that is not a point of order. The minister is being relevant, and I give her the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. As we know, the demand is growing for clean energy sources, and Labor's investment will help position the Northern Territory and Northern Australia to actually diversify their economy and to create jobs. This investment is not a subsidy for fossil fuels. I reject that entirely. Rather, funding will go towards the infrastructure that will support users to export clean energy, critical to meet our commitment to net zero, like green hydrogen and lithium batteries that are critical to decarbonisation. Common user infrastructure at Middle Arm and in industrial precincts across the country, which the Commonwealth regularly invests in, is included in Infrastructure Australia's infrastructure priority list of nationally significant proposals, and the project is currently at the Stage 2 assessment process. The Middle Arm precinct is undergoing significant environmental assessments under the Northern Territory Environment Protection Act and the Federal Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. These assessments will help understand the impact of the proposed construction. The Northern Territory Government has completed and commenced over 200 investigations, including feasibility studies into land and marine development and environmental culture and heritage. This is good for the territory, it's good for the nation, and I reject absolutely it being a fossil fuel subsidy.
Order. When the House comes to order, the member for New England and Riverina will cease interjecting, and so will the Minister for Resources. And I give the call to the member for Reid.
My question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to fix issues about access to affordable, quality early childhood education in Australia?
Give the call to the Minister for Early Childhood Education and Minister for Youth.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Reid for her question. Speaker, this morning the member for Reid and I attended a breakfast with the Early Learning and Care Council of Australia, and I just want to thank Elizabeth Death, the CEO, and all the members who were present there, who engaged very constructively with us on those really important issues of access and affordability to quality early childhood education. And as the member for Reid knows, access to affordable, quality early childhood education and care is not just a vital part of a child's development, it's also very important for our economy. And that's why this Labor government has moved very quickly to make early childhood education and care more affordable for 1.26 million families across Australia. The bill that passed this place this morning is important for children, and it's also important for parents, and particularly for primary caregivers, who are predominantly women, who are looking for more opportunities for work. And indeed, Speaker, today is a significant day for women across Australia. We've had the release of the Women's Budget Statement, the passage of the Paid Domestic and Family Violence Bill, but also the introduction of legislation to change the Fair Work Act to allow for multi-employer bargaining and strengthen the ability of the Fair Work Commission to order pay rises for underpaid female-dominated industries. And these changes, these measures undertaken by a Labor government, are going to have significant ramifications for the early childhood education and care workforce, who are over 90% women. Over 90% women. This government has also made wage growth a priority. From the first day, from our first day, we successfully argued for a pay rise for the lowest paid workers in Australia. something that those opposite opposed. Do we all remember that? Something that those opposite opposed. And all of these reforms, every single one of them, presents positive changes for the early childhood education and care sector, carrying on a Labor legacy of understanding the needs of this sector, acknowledging the importance of early childhood education. And in acknowledging that importance, National Cabinet have also tasked early childhood education and care ministers with identifying and progressing priorities right across the sector, with a particular focus on workforce strategies. And while we can't fix in a number of months what those opposite destroyed over a decade, make no mistake, an Albanese Labor government is working hard to clean up the mess that they left.
Give a call to the member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. In the lead-up to the 2022 election and since, the government has repeatedly cited modelling forecasting that wholesale and residential electricity prices would decrease by 18%. But the government's budget tells us that Australians can expect increases in electricity, gas prices of 50% and 40% respectively. Will the Prime Minister now admit that the modelling Labor stood by was flawed, and so too are the government's energy policies that relied on that modelling?
Give a call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Lindsay for her question. Indeed, we did release modelling done by Reputex in 2021. After that occurred, of course, there was not modelling but a factual change that occurred in May 2022 from the Australian Energy Regulator that pointed to a 20% increase in costs of electricity, and that flowed through to wholesale prices. Of course, there are a couple of pressures on energy prices. One, of course, is the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and the second, well,
members on my left,
the modelling that I was asked about occurred in 2021. If you go back to when the Russian invasion of Ukraine was, I think you'll find out. You'll find out because I remember, because you should recall President Zelensky spoke just before my last budget reply in March of this year to this chamber. The second pressure, of course, is the failure to invest, the fact that 4 gigs went out and 1 gig of energy went in, and that led to a massive failure to invest. 3 years ago, before the 2019 election, though, of course, there was a promise of $1 billion towards new generation, $1 billion. That would have added to 3,800 megawatts of new generation. So that would have meant instead of 4 out, 1 in, that would have been 4.8 out and in and 4 in. So
Order.
it would have made
members on my left.
It would have made a difference. But what we saw was all of the commitments: Alinta Energy in East Gippsland, Alinta in Reeves Plains, Quimbrook Infrastructure Partners in Grattan, APA Group in Dandenong, Australian Industrial Energy in Port Kembla, Sunset Power Proprietary Limited and Delta Electricity Proprietary Limited, Rise Renewables in Baroota, UPC Renewables in Armidale, BE Power Solutions in Cresbrook, Hydro Tasmania Battery of the Nation.
Will pause. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Well, again, it's on relevance, Mr Speaker. It was a very tightly worded question about the Labor Party's modelling. He's gone to the Coalition's policies an election ago, and if he can't answer the question, he should simply say so and sit down.
You may resume your seat. The Prime Minister was asked the member for Hume. All right, I'll call the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. 3 years later, it's what we inherited. 3 years later, not a single dollar of that was delivered. Not a dollar. Not only was there not any megawatts, they aimed for 3,800. They delivered zero. A big duck egg. Not one watt of new generation as a result of that announcement. And of course that's before we go to the farcical situation of the Collinsville promise that was never delivered either.
Has expired. Order. Members on my left, when the House comes to order, the Manager of Opposition Business will cease interjecting while I'm talking. The Manager of Opposition Business will cease interjecting. Give the call to the member for Parramatta.
My question is to the Minister for Social Services. What is the Albanese Labor government's budget doing to support modern families? How will paid parental leave policy benefit Australian families after nearly a decade of policy stagnation?
I give the call to the order. I give the call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you very much, Speaker. And I would like to thank the member for Parramatta for that question. And I am very pleased to inform the member for Parramatta that the Albanese Labor government is delivering the biggest expansion to paid parental leave since Labor introduced it in 2011. And isn't this a stark contrast to what those opposite did with their time in government? They had no appetite to modernise the scheme to reflect how families were changing and what support they needed when bringing a new baby into the world. Instead, paid parental leave sat untouched, neglected by this coalition government. Of course, I need to be fair to those opposite because there was one big reform that they brought into the parliament, not once, but twice, and it was called the Fairer Paid Parental Leave Bill. Now, that sounds very good. That sounds like a good reform. Of course, the objective of that bill was to deny mothers to be able to take their government paid parental leave and their employer paid parental leave. Of course, we all remember how those mothers were characterised by those opposite. On Mother's Day, no less, it was announced by those opposite that these mothers were double dippers, they were rauters, they were fraudsters. This was an appalling way to characterise the women of Australia who were just trying to cobble together leave so that they could maximise their time with newborn babies. So it is and it is quite interesting. I was looking up the Hansard. You'd think that those opposite would have got the message when they couldn't get support from this parliament to pass it. There was an election, and then they brought it back in. They brought it back to the parliament. But I am very pleased that the parliament saw good sense and rejected that change. In stark contrast, the Albanese Labor government is extending paid parental leave by an extra 6 weeks. We're making it more flexible so, of course, parents can use the time with shared care and enable parents to best work out how to sort their arrangements. We're improving the income test to have both an individual or a couple income test, and importantly, single mothers will be able to take the full amount of time. This is what real reform looks like. 180,000 new parents will benefit each year from our reforms, and we're doing it in a responsible way. This reform is long overdue. This reform is so important to Australian families. Families have been calling for it, and far from calling those mothers and dads double dippers, fraudsters and rauters, we will support Australian families every day of the week.
Give the call. Order. I give the call to the member for Goldstein.
To the Prime Minister. Will the government call together manufacturers, consumers, gas producers and electricity companies to manage the energy cost crisis? Business owners in Goldstein and elsewhere are already saying they may have to close due to energy costs, and that's before Treasury's forecast increase of 40% to 50%. Prime Minister, will the government intervene to bring gas prices back to a sustainable level for domestic consumers, small and large businesses, before businesses begin to collapse?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member.
Order. Members on my left and the Deputy Leader of the Opposition can cease interjecting. If a member has been heard in silence on either side of the chamber, we need to show respect for the person answering the question as well. and I'll ask the clock to be reset and give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for her question and for working constructively with the government on these issues. There's no doubt at all that many households and businesses are already doing it tough when it comes to energy prices. Russia's willingness to weaponise energy, which is what they have done, has sent coal, oil and gas prices through the roof globally. They've caused the most significant shock to global energy markets since the 1970s. In Australia, the energy market shock has been compounded by the Coalition's lost decade of denial and delay and dysfunction on energy policy. The 4 gigawatts of dispatchable power that left the system, with only 1 gigawatt coming in. But we're focused on making energy clean, secure and affordable. And in the budget on Tuesday night, by the Treasurer, who did such a good job, he can't even get a question from those opposite, that we are investing $25 billion to power Australia on cleaner, cheaper energy and reduce emissions. Now, as well as these investments—
Members on my right and left.
As well as these investments, we are taking action to secure supply and reliability of electricity and gas. We've asked the ACCC to examine the code of conduct between gas suppliers and gas customers. It's voluntary today, and we've asked them to advise the government on making it mandatory, ensuring reasonable pricing and improving transparency of prices. The budget also has a targeted $67 million package to give the ACCC, the Australian Energy Regulator and Australian Energy Market Operator more powers to monitor gas supply. We're reforming the gas trigger.
The Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting.
The way the former government set it up, you could only consider it once a year. We're moving the ADGSM to quarterly consideration, and just last month, a heads of agreement with East Coast LNG exporters to deliver 157 petajoules to the domestic market next year, enough to cover the ACCC's forecast shortfall of 56, nearly 3 times over. Gas supply is not the problem. It's a decade of inaction, denial and delay that has left us overexposed after the invasion of Ukraine. We know that there's much more to do to clean up the mess that those opposite left, and we will do it in a way that doesn't make the inflation problem even worse.
Order. The member for Barker will cease interjecting. Give the call to the member for Newcastle.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Environment and Water. How is the Albanese Labor government addressing nearly a decade of neglect and building a better future for our environment?
Give the call to the Minister for the Environment and Water.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Newcastle for her question. She's a very keen bushwalker, and I know that she works very well with the environment groups in her electorate, including the Hunter Wetlands Group. After almost a decade of neglect and vandalism of the environment of those opposite, we've got a big job to do, and that's why this Labor government invested $1.8 billion in environmental repair and restoration in this budget. This budget will protect the Great Barrier Reef. It will save our native species. It will employ 1,000 new land care rangers. It will support new Indigenous protected areas and new extra Indigenous rangers. It will fund the Environmental Defenders Office for the first time in 9 years and clean up our urban rivers and waterways. Of course, we've only been in government for a few months now, but in that time, we've already seen the difference that a government committed to the environment can make. We've legislated a more ambitious emissions reduction target with a clear path to net zero. We are rewriting our environmental laws to better protect the environment but also give business faster, clearer decision-making. We're establishing a new Environmental Protection Agency, a tough cup on the beat. We're determined to prevent new extinctions. We're protecting our most precious environments by expanding the amount of land and ocean under protection to 30% by 2030. We've signed the Leaders' Pledge for Nature. We've released the State of the Environment report, something kept secret by those opposite. Kept secret by those opposite. We're establishing a new nature repair market to reward farmers and other landholders for their work in restoring and protecting nature. We're working with the states and territories to improve our waste management and build a more circular economy, including getting rid of problem plastics. Australians care very deeply about our environment, about the plants and animals and places that make us unique, and we are determined to protect and restore and manage our natural environment, because under the Albanese Labor government, the environment is back. Now, I just noticed, by the way, a lot of interjections about dams. Why are you too gutless to ask me a question if you want to know the answers?
Order. When the House comes to order, I give the call to the member for Longman. The member for Groom will cease interjecting and is on a warning.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. I refer to his answer earlier this week on RGS, a manufacturer in my electorate that uses over 200 megawatt-hours per year that is facing an increase of around $43,000 in power bills. The default market offer to which the minister referred in his answer is only available to small businesses that consume less than 100 kilowatt-hours. So the minister did not answer my question. So I ask again, why are there such steep electricity prices facing this and many other businesses, and what is the government doing about it?
Nothing. Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his question. My concern goes to all businesses in Queensland and all businesses across our country. My concern goes to all households across Australia and their energy bills, because we want to work, and we are working, and we will work to ensure that their power prices are as low as possible, whether they're on the DMO or not. But the DMO does feed into energy prices. That's a statement of fact. The former Minister for Energy knew that. Perhaps that's why he hid that increase in the Australian people, Mr Speaker. Because in the budget, we had a choice. We could have hidden the pressures on power prices, option A, that the previous government took. We could have hidden that, or option B is to actually be upfront with the Australian people about the pressures. That's the option we took. That's the option we took, Mr Speaker. We take the option of actually being honest with the Australian people.
The member for Hume has been continually interjecting right throughout question time. He will leave the chamber under 94A. Order. There is far too much noise in the chamber. There is a general warning. I will take action if this level of noise continues. Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
It's a sad outcome that the member for Hume has left us, Mr Speaker, but we are concerned and we are upfront. In relation to Queensland small businesses, small and large and medium, we should care about them all. And the increase in small business prices that the member for Hume hid from the Australian people was 12.8%, $705. I make no apologies for pointing that out to the House and the Australian people.
Has the minister concluded his answer? Has the minister concluded his answer? No. I give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
This repeated claim of hiding, the standing orders are very. The standing orders, Mr Speaker, are very clear. All imputations of improper motives to a member shall be considered highly disorderly. That's clearly what this minister is repeatedly doing.
Order.
And
You may resume your seats. I remind the minister of the standing order, and I ask him to return to the question.
Certainly, Mr Speaker. Thank you, Mr Speaker. But the fact is the fact. The previous minister hid the facts from the Australian people. He should be ashamed of himself.
The minister has. The member for Page. I give the call to the member for McEwen.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care. How will the aged care reforms in the budget restore dignity for older people accessing aged care services?
The call to the Minister for Aged Care and Sport.
I thank the member for McEwen for his question and acknowledge his work to improve aged care in his electorate, particularly working with visits to the Calvary Centre and the issues that they face with respect to workforce. Mr Speaker, after 9 years of neglect, finally this nation has a budget that respects the work of older Australians and puts them first. It is a proud week for all of us on this side of the chamber that Labor has delivered a budget that puts $3.9 billion into aged care funding. And today, Mr Speaker, we passed legislation, the second aged care reform piece of legislation in this parliament that will deliver on our election commitments that we made to the Australian people. Around-the-clock nursing care and more time for care in nursing homes. This budget implements 22 aged care election commitments, and this budget implements 23 recommendations of the Royal Commission, which means now, in just 5 months in office, this side of the House has delivered 37 recommendations of the Royal Commission. 37 recommendations in 5 months, compared with 9 recommendations in 17 months from those officers. A truly dreadful record that you should be dreadfully ashamed of. It is about time that we act on aged care, because for almost a decade the former government has disrespected aged care recipients with budget cuts, and they have decimated a workforce, particularly in regional and remote areas. And Lord knows we cannot progress without our aged care workers. Now, I note that we've still got the Fitzroy Community School students with us here in the House this afternoon. If for some unfathomable reason Question Time has turned you off the idea of elected representative life, may I encourage you to consider a career in aged care, because we need you. And in Parliament this week, we have welcomed 7 proud ANMF nurses to visit many people on this side of the House, many people on that side of the House, and 2 UWU aged care workers as well, meeting with parliamentarians to tell us what it is like in aged care. And I know that people here would want me to acknowledge Glenn and Stephanie and Sharon and Stuart and Alison and Rachel and Julianne, who came to tell us, and to the frontline workers who are watching on and really hoping that we act as swiftly as we have so far. We want to say thank you for all those shifts that you did in PPE, and thank you for all those times that you came in on your day off because there was no one else to do it. And thank you for all those times that you stopped and held a hand and checked in and cared, even though you had 67 other things that you needed to be doing. We see you and we thank you and we recognise you, and today we made laws in this place that values your work, and so did this budget, and we will continue to do that for many budgets to come.
Give the call to the member for Capricornia.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The federal government is intending to delay $800 million of Commonwealth funding to construct the Rockhampton Ring Road by at least 2 years. In 2019, as Shadow Infrastructure Minister, the Prime Minister issued a media release titled, quote, "Rockhampton Ring Road a certainty under Labor." Why is the Prime Minister breaking his personal guarantee to the people of Rockhampton?
I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for her question, and the member would know that as Infrastructure Minister there was substantial investment went into Rockhampton roads, particularly Yeppen floodplain, which we funded. Did the planning for
members on my left.
Yeppen floodplain. Yeppoon's a different place. Yeppoon's a different place, and you might want to ask the member for Capricornia, because Yeppoon is on the coast north of Rockhampton, and Yeppen floodplain is to the south. It's the southern entry of the Bruce Highway into Rockhampton. Queenslander! Queenslander!
Order. Members on my right.
Says it all. Says it all. Because I know about
members on my
Queensland
right.
roads, because the Bruce Highway under John Howard's government put $1.3 billion in. We put $6.7 billion in half the time. In half the time, including the Yeppen floodplain, including planning money for the Rockhampton Ring Road, that began when Kirsten Livermore was the member for Capricornia, who campaigned for it, but when government changed in 2013, it went on the back burner. So you were in government for almost a decade, and you haven't dug a hole on the project. The environmental approvals aren't finished. The funding was underfunded for the project, so that when we looked at the detail of the project, it doesn't have enough money allocated to it under you. But we will get this project done, like we got the Yeppoon floodplain done, like we got, by the way, roads to Yeppoon done as well.
Will leave the chamber under 94A. Order. Order. The House will come. The House will come to order. The House will come to order. So, ministers on my right will cease interjecting. All right. I give the call to the member for Bean.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How is the Albanese Labor government providing the overdue leadership on energy policy that has been missing for nearly a decade?
I give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank my friend for the question. And the budget brought down by the Treasurer on Tuesday night certainly provides that leadership for energy, with $20 billion in funding for rewiring the nation, $2 billion for powering the nation, $250 million for community batteries, funding for our regulators and operator to implement the better regulation of energy that's been agreed with state and territory energy ministers, and much more, Mr Speaker. This is all the leadership that we are providing after a decade of denial and delay. But as I said before, the government was also faced with a choice about being honest with the Australian people, including the pressures on energy prices in the budget, being very upfront and explicit about it in the budget, or taking the alternative approach of not being honest with the Australian people. And that, we know, has a precedent by the member for Hume, the former member, who on the 8th of April signed into law a regulation to delay the release of the energy price rises until after the election. Now, I understand his reasons for doing so, Mr Speaker. I understand his sensitivity. There's been a lot of commentary about election promises and power prices. And in the 2019 election, which was won by the coalition, the member for Hume promised a 25% reduction in the average wholesale energy price. That was their promise in 2019. Turned out, and the Deputy Leader of the Opposition says prices went down. Wholesale prices went up 240%, Mr Speaker. Now, if the Leader of the Opposition, Deputy Leader of the Opposition thinks that's a reduction, we've got a bigger problem than I thought we had, Mr Speaker. And I thought we had a pretty big problem with the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. But even closer to the election, the then Minister for Energy was still at it.
Interjecting.
In November 2021, he promised a 6% fall by 2024 in energy prices. The Minister for Energy did in November 2021. That's pretty close to the 2022 election. But of course, by the time of the 2022 election, wholesale prices were up 439%, not down 6, but up 439%. That's a missed it by that much moment, Mr Speaker. But of course, we know the minister hid the price rise. But the cover-up gets worse. Yesterday I was asked twice, 3 times in fact, did you know this was going to happen? And 3 times he said, no, I didn't. He denies knowing there were energy price rises. The then minister, the member for Hume, wants the House to believe and the Australian people to believe he signed a law change to hide a power price rise he didn't know about. He wants us to believe he didn't know that there was a price rise, so he went to all the trouble of asking his department to prepare the paperwork, sending it to the Governor-General, and he didn't know what he was doing. Did he do it with his eyes shut? Did the member for Cook do it instead? We'll add it to the dossier of dodgy documents that the member for Hume is so famous for, Mr Speaker. I hope he's not working on the Leader of the Opposition speech for tonight while he's being punted.
give the call to the member for Fairfax.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question goes to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, will you apologise to Australians for your broken promise to deliver a $275 cut to their electricity bills, a promise you made on 97 occasions?
I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks
Members
very
on
much,
my left and right.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thought I might get another question on infrastructure. I thought I might, but not quite. But instead, I get a question. I get a question from a coalition, that announced 22 different energy policies and didn't land a single one. That's right. Not one. Unlike us, who put out modelling by Reputex in 2021. Independent, not Labor Party modelling, independent from Australia's leading energy economists in 2021. But what we did, of course, was to continue to fulfil our commitment to the Rewiring the Nation program was there in the budget. And the Rewiring the Nation program, as the Minister for Energy has pointed out, is based upon the Australian Energy Market Operators Integrated Systems Plan of making sure that transmission was fit for purpose in the 21st century. What we have done is be upfront about the challenges which are there, the challenges which have been created by two major issues. One, of course, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has had an impact on global energy prices. Apparently that has skipped the attention of the coalition. And the second, of course, is the fact that we inherited such a failed position of 4 gigawatts of energy leaving the system, but only 1 gigawatt going back in. And of course, it wasn't just the Liberal Party who committed to a 25% reduction in the wholesale electricity price by the end of 2021 during the 2019 campaign. It was also the National Party did the same thing.
The Prime Minister will just pause. The member for Fairfax. The member for Fairfax is seeking the call on a point of order. The member for Fairfax.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question went to the broken promise of $275 and whether the Prime Minister would apologise to the Australian—
Resume your seat. It was a broad partisan question, and I'm giving the call to the Prime Minister when the House comes to order.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. It said that it said very clearly that they would have a 25% reduction in the average wholesale electricity price, and went through all these things that they said would happen, like Battery of the Nation, that just didn't eventuate. Their $1 billion fund of new energy, of which zero was delivered. Not a single watt, let alone a gigawatt, was delivered as a result of this policy. And instead of that, what they also did was went on these exercises in basically nonsense spending money, including $4 million they planned and funded to the proponents, mind you, of the Collinsville coal-fired power plant. $4 million to the people who were building it, the private sector operators who were building it. They planned, gave them $4 million.
The Prime Minister's time has expired. I give the call to the member for Melbourne.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. With the United Nations, the International Energy Agency and the world scientists saying there can be no new investment in coal and gas if we're to meet net zero targets, why does the budget contain $30 million to frack for gas in the Beetaloo Basin? Well, does the Prime Minister agree with his other minister that gas is just a low-emissions hydrocarbon, and is low-emission hydrocarbon the new clean coal?
The call to the Minister for Resources.
benefit of the House and for the Leader of the Greens that the $30 million you're speaking of is from the cooperative drilling program. There was a commitment under the former government. That money has been expended or is in the current use of those contracts. It goes to the question asked earlier to the Minister for Industry, who's not responsible for that work. This government has ended that program and the remaining part of that funding envelope has now been returned to the budget.
The call to the member for Swan.
My question is to the Minister for Resources and Minister for Northern Australia. What is the significance of critical minerals to Australia and what role will they play in achieving net zero emissions?
Give the call to the Minister for Resources.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and thank you very much to the member for Swan, the incoming member for Swan. Her father was a nickel miner from Gambelda and she knows the value of the resources sector. She worked in it for many years before coming to this place. So thank you to the member for Swan. Mr Speaker, for Australia and the world, reaching the net zero emissions target by 2050 is absolutely impossible without the critical minerals and our extraordinary endowment of them. These minerals will be a significant part of the global journey to net zero emissions by 2050. Mr Speaker, without the resources sector, we simply cannot reach net zero. The world needs more minerals, not less, because these minerals are essential for these low emissions technologies, such as wind turbines, electric vehicles and battery storage. The demand around the world is growing and growing fast. The technical expertise and know-how of Australia's resources industry will be absolutely essential to grow the critical minerals industry and our new resources economy. And Australia is especially well placed. We're the world's largest producer of lithium, with WA being home to some of the world's largest lithium deposits at Greenbushes and Wodgina, which I was very pleased to be able to visit just the other week in the Pilbara. We're the third largest producer of cobalt, fifth largest producer of nickel and the fourth largest producer of rare earth minerals. In the first 5 months since the election, this government is pursuing Australia's critical minerals opportunities with vigour. We have agreed to a critical minerals investment partnership with India. We have signed up to the US-led Mineral Security Partnership alongside Canada, Finland, France, Germany, Japan, Korea, the EU, the UK and Sweden. And just last week in Perth, I signed a critical minerals partnership with Japan in the presence of RPM and also in the presence of the Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. And I was deeply honoured to be able to welcome both our Prime Minister to BHP Nickel West for the second time, maybe the third time even, but also the Japanese Prime Minister. I'm quite certain it's probably the first time a Japanese Prime Minister has visited the seat of Brand, and in particular the Nickel West refinery there in Kwinana, which provides 85% of its nickel to the global battery material suppliers. This government is investing a further $50 million over 3 years to the Critical Minerals Development Program and $50 million to the Australian Critical Minerals R&D Hub. It is a fact that the government from before the election had two critical minerals strategies overseen by two resources ministers, both at the same time. Those critical minerals strategies failed to make the connection between critical minerals and the global drive to net zero. This government is reviewing that strategy. It will make that important link because we don't have our heads in the sand about the need to address climate change.
Order. Time has expired. I give the call to the member for Lyne.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. I refer the Minister to the previous Coalition's government decision to build a new gas project plant at Kurri Kurri to put downward pressure on electricity prices. Labor promised to commit an additional $700 million to the project if they are elected, but that commitment was very absent from the budget. With power prices set to increase by 50% under this government, why has Labor abandoned a project that will provide affordable, reliable electricity for Australians when they need it most?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
I thank the honourable member for his question, but I say respectfully to him he's completely wrong. And he's completely misunderstood the budget papers if he believes that the Kurri Kurri plant has been cancelled. It is, unlike Snowy 2.0, currently on track and will be delivered. And it is a non-budget matter. So I think the honourable member's just completely got the wrong end of the stick.
We give the call to the member for Adelaide.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. Today, the Parliament passed the Jobs and Skills Australian legislation. How will Jobs and Skills Australia help tackle the skills shortage crisis the government inherited?
Give the call to the Minister for Skills.
Great question. I'd like to thank the member for Adelaide for his question. Yes, he's absolutely right. Today the Parliament passed Jobs and Skills Australia legislation. And that is, of course, a commitment, an election promise by this Prime Minister and by this government to deliver a body that can provide the right sort of advice to ensure that we have the skills that we need in this country. And what we do know is we have not only just inherited $1 trillion of debt, we've inherited a massive skills deficit. It doesn't matter where you look across the economy and labour market, Speaker. Whatever sector of the economy, we have problems in terms of supply of skills. The National Skills Commission last report said that we have doubled the occupations on the shortage list from 150, almost doubled, 153 to 286 in 12 months. And that's why it's absolutely critical that we move very fast on this matter. I'd like to thank the members and senators who worked with me on this legislation across the parliament. And we really need to move very quickly, as I say, and we need to deploy every avenue we have to find the skills that our economy needs. And the first thing I think I need to say, I need to acknowledge the Minister for Home Affairs and Immigration, who are seeking to restore skilled migration pathways that have been absolutely ruined as a result of the efforts of those opposite. I mean, they left an entire mess. Not only did they, quite understandably, they closed the borders, but why would they ever possible not support visa holders in this country so that they would leave in droves and leave a skills deficit in our economy? But that's exactly what happened. The other thing we need to make sure we do, Speaker, is invest in skills in this country by providing the skills in areas of shortage. That's why we've announced 180,000 TAFE and VET fee-free places for next year, provided in areas of acute shortage. But there's another area too, Mr Speaker, that we need to consider. And when you have a tight labour market, that is a very significant challenge, but it is an opportunity for us to do something that's really critical. And that is for those people, Speaker, that have been locked out of the labour market for too long. We have many Australians, people with disability, First Nations people, women that are enduring economic insecurity, older Australians who suffer discrimination in trying to get a job. And they have an opportunity, probably an opportunity of a lifetime, because of the tight labour market. And this government is going to make sure that we provide the support, working with business, to make sure they get chances in this labour market. That will be our pledge. We will be providing the sort of support that's needed to provide people with disabilities, First Nations people, an opportunity. I'm actually visiting Tennant Creek tomorrow. I'll be in Darwin with the Chief Minister, and not long after that, to work on these issues in the Territory. I'll be doing the same in every state and territory so that we get this right.
The call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice plate.